Great. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the kickoff informational event on the newly created Coastal Resilience and Tree Fund, or the CRTF, as we'll refer to it today. Please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, including your affiliation, and please remember to mute when you're not speaking. We're going to present all of the information that we have to share with you about this new funding opportunity first, and then we're going to have substantial time for question and answer. So please feel free to ask your questions in the chat during the presentation, or you can wait and ask your questions on camera if you'd like, or definitely off mute during the Q&A session. You can see people are starting to introduce themselves in the chat. Wonderful. I'd like to go ahead and introduce the Wetlands Watch and Virginia Outdoors Foundation teams. My name is Mary Carson Stiff. I'm the Deputy Director of Wetlands Watch. My background is land conservation law and climate adaptation policy, with a special emphasis on FEMA programs and wetlands migration. I'd like to introduce the CRTF project team at Wetlands Watch, starting with Stacy McGraw.
Good afternoon. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm Stacy McGraw. I'm the Green Infrastructure Project Manager for Wetlands Watch, and my background is in horticulture and green infrastructure.
And Madison Teeter.
Yep, and then my name is Madison Teeter. Thank you all for joining. I'm the Flood Risk Project Manager here at Wetlands Watch. I assist with our FEMA programs as well, and also on our Community Flood Preparedness Fund outreach work.
Super. Next, I'd like to introduce our partners at the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, starting with Martha Little, a longtime colleague and friend of Wetlands Watch.
Great, thank you. My name's Martha Little. I'm a Deputy Director of Conservation at the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. LinkedIn told me I've been there 17 years now. So, but anyway, my background is also in planning and conservation and Chesapeake Bay program work. Thanks very much, Mary Carson.
Thank you. All right, other VOF staff that are on the call. Emily?
Hi, my name's Emily White. I'm the Grant Program Manager at VOF, and my background is in agriculture and managing grants. We also have grant rounds that are open right now, so if anyone's looking to get people outside or make land available for the public, please check out our website, and I will turn it over to my colleague, Emma Weaver.
Hi, yes, I'm Emma. I'm very glad to be a small part of this. My background is in wildlife conservation, and I'm currently the grant program assistant for VOF.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Stacy, if you don't mind advancing the next slide. So why Wetlands Watch and Virginia Outdoors Foundation? This partnership grew out of many years of collaboration and discussion about how land conservation can build resilience to increase flood risk in Virginia's coastal communities. VOF has been working with us on pilot project work to explore how conservation easements can be used in particular for wetlands migration. And they've been an instrumental kind of sounding board for how we feel as though this work may progress and help communities and neighborhoods deal with sea level rise risk in particular. So a couple years ago, VOF approached Wetlands Watch requesting our help in developing a new grant program that would provide support for small scale resilience projects. And after much discussion, we decided to proceed as partners in administering the Coastal Resilience and Tree Fund. A little bit of background about Virginia Outdoors Foundation. They were created by the General Assembly in 1966 and are technically a body politic, which is really a fancy name and subcategory of state agencies for the Commonwealth. And they are the leading conservation entity in Virginia. Their work has protected over 850,000 acres across Virginia. And as you can see, they own and oversee more than 4,400 acres of open space on 6 reserves. So they do a lot of traditional land conservation through holding conservation easements. They own conservation land in fee, or they own the whole bundle of property sticks. And their work is really that of a traditional land trust, but of course do much more than that, as they are an agency of the Commonwealth. So in addition to this traditional conservation work, VOF offers many different grants, and this grant is just one of those. The existing grants help build capacity in smaller land conservation organizations. They help fund land conservation specifically, so whether that's easements or land acquisitions, that's that fee ownership. They also support outdoor access and educational programs through one of their grant opportunities. And then now with this grant program, VOF grants will be building coastal resiliency and increasing tree canopy in Virginia. In addition to all of that work, we're really excited to be in partnership with VOF in this kind of kickoff new emerging sector for VOF, coastal resilience. Why Wetlands Watch? Well, we are a nonprofit that has been working on coastal resilience and sea level rise adaptation for about 20 years, and we have a lot of really close partnerships and relationships with local government, regional government, and other state agencies. We have been exploring how nature-based solutions can help address current flood risk and future flood risk. And we've been exploring this concept of adaptive land management through many different of our program areas, and think that there is a real opportunity to build capacity for this work through these new grant resources that are being made available from Virginia Outdoors Foundation. So these resources are coming from VOF, and Wetlands Watch has developed the grant program and will be working to administer it. Okay, next slide. So how did this program really get developed? So Wetlands Watch has been very engaged in the grants landscape for many years, starting primarily in the FEMA world. So FEMA is really the main game in town in terms of funding flood risk mitigation and adaptation practices. And because of that, we have done a deep dive into understanding how FEMA administers grants and how grant recipients manage the resources, and where some of the challenges are, and where some of the successes are, in fact, or also. In addition to the FEMA grants landscape, we've also worked really hard to understand what additional grant resources are available for communities, small nonprofits, civic leagues, et cetera. And these grants can range from private programs, private foundations, to small state or large state awards. And Madison mentioned during her introduction a new state grant program called the Community Flood Preparedness Fund that's made available to local governments and other entities in the state of Virginia. And these resources come from Virginia's participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So we've kind of been very invested in trying to figure out what resources are available to do resilience work in Virginia. And because of that work, we understand that there are a lot of gaps that need to be filled in the grant funding landscape. And so we wanted to be sure that in establishing a new grants program, we are understanding where those opportunities are and where there already are plenty of funds available. So just to go back previously, in doing this work, if you could go back one slide, Stacy, we wanted to be sure we were hearing from everybody that's going to be a potential user. We surveyed over 75 people, many of whom may be on the call, and asked them where their needs really were. That needs assessment was really important to Wetlands Watch to make sure we were setting something up that was going to be successful and was going to really work to fill those gaps. We had a good response rate. While we were doing that needs assessment, we also were doing comprehensive research, and that really captures what I mentioned in terms of Wetlands Watch doing a deep dive into existing grant programs to understand how they work and how they don't work. Then after all of this was done, we followed up and had one-on-one group meetings with those stakeholders that were surveyed, and in particular, those who gave extensive remarks. We then released our draft grant manual and solicited comments from the public. And from that, we developed the final grant manual. So we worked really hard to make sure we were doing the due diligence up front that many grant programs unfortunately don't do. And we feel as though that's a real mistake. Okay, so next slide, Stacy, please. So the development of the funds, the feedback that we received from stakeholders can be seen in the top white squares. What folks said was funds for stewardship and maintenance are just not available through other grant programs. And this was a real #1 priority. And we have dedicated a project category because of that feedback.
12-1.
In addition to that, upfront funding and matching resources were incredibly important to the stakeholders that we received responses from. People wanted reimbursement to be made available right away at the time of the grant award being made, and no match was essential. It's just such a barrier to entry for so many grant programs to require a match when folks don't have those resources available. That's why they're applying for the grant programs in the first place. Funding for small projects was really important. We do have that those FEMA grants are typically or can be used for big projects, as can those new state program funds, the Community Flood Preparedness Funds. And so projects that are really like under $2,000, there isn't a place for grant program dollars for these small projects. So in response, we really wanted to make it available, these resources available for those small efforts. Gap funding, I've already talked about this, but you can see where gaps really exist according to our stakeholders in the existing grant landscape. So we address those through resources or through the grant manual and the grant program process in the CFPF. Finally, the two top barriers to applying for funding is capacity. The grant programs that exist today are tedious, time-consuming. You have to have a degree in grant applications and grant writings to even cross that first threshold of applying. And that doesn't even guarantee you're going to receive the funds. So there was a lot of work done by Wetlands Watch staff to ensure that this process would be as simple as possible. So next slide, Stacy. And I'm going to turn it over to Stacy, who's going to talk about the goals and about the program specifically.
So in cooperation with the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, we had some goals going into the development. Our #1 goal really is to achieve increased resilience to flooding, sea level rise, and extreme weather events. So extreme weather doesn't just include hurricanes or torrential downpours. That can also include, extreme heat events, drought, those sorts of things. We want to help organizations plan and get ready to implement projects in the future. So if your organization isn't quite there yet, you don't have project plans ready to go and need some funding to start that process, then this grant could potentially be a good match for you. We also wanted to look at ways to promote the use of trees as a best management practice and as a component of resiliency. Trees can help manage stormwater as well as some of those heat events. And we wanted to look at ways to raise public awareness about the role of nature-based solutions. So we are looking for projects that are going to have those elements involved. So as far as our funding priorities, we are looking for projects with clear, achievable goals and outcomes that are aligned with those goals. If you need help to develop any portion of your application, or you have questions about whether or not your project is going to align with the goals or priorities, you can reach out to us and we'll help you navigate that process. So we are also looking for projects that are going to address resiliency concerns, specifically in environmental justice areas. We have a Virginia DEQ tool linked on our website that will help you find if your project is located in one of these areas, that looks at providing resources for these distinct areas that are comprised of either low income or people of color who have traditionally been underserved in this space. We're also looking for projects that are going to involve the community. Some of the best projects that we have seen historically have been ones that have really engaged with the community in the development process, gotten their feedback and taken their concerns and needs into account. So projects that are going to demonstrate that that's been part of their process, and that have public outreach or educational benefits. So we want to use these projects as a way to keep the ball rolling and get people engaged in this type of work and see these types of solutions really benefiting their communities. So along with that, publicly accessible projects are going to be prioritized because they provide the best space for engaging the public. We know that native plants are best suited to some of these conditions. So we are really requiring that projects use at least 90% or more regionally native plants. We did not go with 100% because we understand that there are some challenges in obtaining native plants. We can work with you to help develop that plant list if you need that assistance. And we can also work with you on sourcing some of these plants if you need that. And then we're looking at organizations that really don't have other sources of funding for these particular projects. And this goes back to filling those gaps. So for the small projects and some of the others that Mary Carson went over, those are priorities for us to get funds in the hands of organizations that otherwise can't access them. So aside from priorities, eligibility for this grant really first is geographic. This is designed for the coastal zone of Virginia, and that coastal zone is defined by the DEQ Coastal Zone Management Program. The full list of cities and counties and all incorporated towns within those counties can be found in the grant manual. But we've got, the handy little map here. The types of organizations is pretty extensive. It involves all of your civic groups, volunteer groups, pretty much anything other than state or federal agencies are eligible, including private citizens and small businesses. We do have a definition of a small business, and that has been stated by the Virginia Small Business Supplier Diversity Program. The link to that is also on our website, so you can find out if you fit those qualifications. One caveat is that if you are not a tax exempt organization, which probably applies mostly to private citizens and small businesses, there may be some tax liability in accessing these funds. Each organization or private citizen can submit up to 2 proposals per category. which would be a total of 10 proposals for the entire grant if you submitted 2 per category. If you are submitting a project proposal for an installation project, because of the timeline of this grant period, we are looking for shovel-ready projects that you can start constructing as soon as the funds are approved. And then all of these projects, or the portion of the project that we are funding, need to be completed by May 31st of 2024. Those 5 project categories are capacity building. So these are the ones that are designed to help you get ready to plan and implement projects in the future. You can apply for up to $2,500 per project. And we've just got some things listed as examples. These lists are not all encompassing, just as a starting point for thinking about what kinds of things that we would fund. For green infrastructure, you have a $10,000 per project cap. We have provided a list of green infrastructure practices and some definitions on our website that you can refer back to if you're not entirely sure that your project is going to meet the requirements. We have sectioned out shoreline protection. It is considered green infrastructure, but we wanted to give this its own category. And that also has a $10,000 per project limit. Stewardship, we got a lot of interest in this category. We're giving up to $5,000 per project. And this can be used towards maintenance of existing projects, also of natural spaces, invasive species removal, as long as those are being replaced with native plants or some other method that's going to help exclude the return of those invasive species, plant replacement or other repairs to existing best management practices. And this is also going to cover monitoring practices for any of the green infrastructure or shoreline protection practices. And then lastly, tree planting. This was a category that the Virginia Outdoors Foundation specifically requested. This is the only category that has a specific amount of money dedicated to it. So 50,000 of the total grant funds will be put towards tree planting, and you can get up to 5,000 per project. If your project is already funded through another cost share and you are looking to submit a proposal for the property owner share of the match that's needed for those projects. So this might include, the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program or similar programs, then you need to apply for those under the project category if it was the entire project was being funded that it would fit under. So if it's a living shoreline through VCAP, you would apply through the shoreline protection category. As far as our timeline, the grant application window is open right now. It'll stay open until 11:59 p.m. on April 4th. We are available for assistance Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. You can email us to set up an appointment to talk to us about the assistance that you may need during that time period. Once that closes, we have set aside some time to review, and then we expect to notify both successful proposals and unsuccessful ones the week of June 5th, and begin sending out those grant agreements. Those will be due back towards the end of August. And then, as I've said, all the projects need to be concluded by May 31st, and final reports will be due at the end of July of next year. So now I'm going to turn this over to Madison to talk about accessing and navigating the grant portal.
Yes, so the primary way that folks will be applying for these funds is through VOF's web grant portal. We will put the link in the chat in a moment, but you can easily access this link both through Wetlands Watch's website and VOF's website. Registration is required to submit an application. It is very simple. We have step-by-step instructions linked on the web grants website if anyone has any trouble, but you will just do that registration, and then once you do that, it will take up to 24 hours for your registration to be processed and approved. But then once that's approved, you will receive an email saying that you can then go into the software and start working on your application. When you do register through this process, you can actually indicate which funds you're interested in applying to. And so make sure if you're applying to this grant, you actually select the Coastal Resilience and Trees Fund during the registration process. Next slide. So once you register, this is what the inside of the portal will look like. We just want to make sure folks can easily access this, as this is the main way that we're asking folks to apply for the program. Once you get in, you will see on the left side this type of table of contents that will help you navigate through the system. You will click on funding opportunities, and then once you do that, forward to the next slide. You will see this page where you'll see a list of all the funding opportunities available through VOF. One of those will be the Coastal Resilience and Trees Fund, and you will click on that offering indicated by the red arrow here. And then once you do that, this is the top of the page that will look up. And if you have not yet started an application, you'll just click on that big green button on the top right that says Start New Application, and you'll go into the system and start filling out those fields. This type of application is one that you can save and come back to. So make sure if you are working on it that you do save it before you leave it again. Next slide. Once you do leave the application and come back into it, you'll then navigate to the applications tab on the left side as opposed to the funding opportunities, and you will see a list of all of the applications that you've started. This is just a sample of what that page looks like. We did a couple of test applications so folks would know what those look like. You can see here the top one is submitted and the bottom one is editing. So that will be what it looks like once you've submitted a grant application and if you are still in the process of editing one. And then once you do that, you'll just click into the one that you're still editing, very similarly to how you clicked into the funding opportunity page. And once you do that, on to the next slide. It'll look like this. If you're still editing that application, it'll have the title of your application, the status that it's at, and then just to continue editing it, once again, there's that big green button on the top right that just says Edit Application. What's also nice is that there's this Ask a Question function button there. It's that blue button, and if you do that, it will send an email directly to our grants email at Wetlands Watch, and we'll be able to respond to you directly from there. But we put the grants email as well in the chat, so whether you use this function or whether you email us directly through your email, we will receive your questions and help you through any troubles you might be having with the application. And then on to the next. Just some final notes about this and then the application process. Web grants is preferred for how people are applying for the grant, but if that is not possible, maybe due to limited internet connection, we do have a PDF version of the application available that is listed on our website for the grant program as well as within the grant manual. So if folks need to take that route, they can. It's all of the same things and components that are listed within the web grants portal. Just make sure that you fill all those out and you email it to the grants@wetlandswatch.org email within the same deadline for the application period. We also have a plethora of application resources available for folks who are looking to apply to the program, in hopes that this will really help walk through every thing that we're asking folks to submit, and if there is in need of any assistance of accessing what we're requesting of folks, all of these things should help get you there. So all of the things that are linked on our webpage are once again the full grant manual and the copy of the PDF application if that is the preferred method of submitting the application. We also have a copy of our scoring criteria sheet. This is not something that applicants need to fill out. It is just for you all to look at so you can see how we will be weighting and scoring the applications. So you can see how well, if you're contemplating applying, how well your application will do within the program. We have a proposal checklist. So this is to help you navigate through all the things that you've submitted, whether it be through web grants or through the PDF application, just to make sure you have submitted all of the necessary components of the application. Because if we do receive an uncompleted application, it will not be considered. So we really just want to emphasize to make sure that you walk through that proposal checklist and make sure that you have met all the criteria for everything that needs to be submitted. We also have a maintenance plan template that's for the green infrastructure portion categories. A maintenance plan is required to apply for those categories. And if that's something that you all need assistance with, we do have a template for what that should look like. We also have a budget template, pretty straightforward, just helping you all put together of what that budget should look like when you submit it, whether it be through web grants or through the PDF application. We also have green infrastructure guidance. We have examples of what green infrastructure practices that this fund will award. And then lastly, we have a tool to identify the environmental justice communities to see if your project is located within a community that you can flag as an environmental justice community. And I think that's it. And I'll turn it back over to the entire team, but at this time, we're taking questions or comments. You can either enter them in the chat or you can do the raise your hand function if you'd like to speak to us directly on camera. And if you think of any questions, once again, please feel free to reach out to us again after this webinar using this email. And just want to note, we are recording this webinar and we will be posting the recording and the copy of the slides of the presentation onto our grants webpage as well for future reference.
Any questions? There were 0 in the chat. Oh, first one. Okay, Robin Woolsey asks, do applicants have to wait to begin construction until after award announcements are made? Stacy, I'll let you answer that.
Sure. So only for the portion of the project that's going to be funded by the CRTF. So one of the ineligible expenses that you'll see in the manual are costs that occur outside of the grant period. So if it's a VCAP project and there's other funding there that can get the project kick started a little bit earlier, feel free to go ahead. But if the project is fully funded through CRTF or you want to start work on the portion that is funded, that needs to wait until after the grant agreements have been received. And we're allowing 2 months for you to get those agreements back to us. Some organizations are going to have a process that they have to follow that takes some time, but if you are able to send it back to us right away, then we can process it right away and get you your funds as soon as possible.
Great. Jennifer has her hand raised. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Hi, thanks so much for having this call. So I'm the chairman of one of our local wetlands boards. And I'd just like to understand, especially for these smaller projects, you know, the ones that you were talking about, this fills a gap for them. How and at what point in the process do these people have to have a permit on hand? Is it before they apply for the grant or is it after? Because a lot of times people have, you know, may want to put a living shoreline in or something, but you know, the nature of where they are on the river or on the bay, it just isn't a good fit for a living shoreline. So we always try to do a living shoreline, but sometimes we might suggest alternatives based on, you know, fetch and things like that. So where in the process can people apply for these grants, and then what happens after that? Does Wetlands Watch bring it before the local boards?
No, Wetlands Watch does not take any responsibility for obtaining permits. That is something that should be completed or at least in process before the applications are submitted. If your project is not feasible for the site, that is one of the scoring criteria that we look at, whether or not the project is appropriate for where it's being proposed. But the permits are the responsibility of the applicant or the property owner. However, that relationship has been worked out. And we don't have a part in that, but we would like to know that those permits have been obtained.
Okay, so shovel ready would include, you already have the permit from the city for this project.
Yes.
Got
The
it.
only exception to that is if you are looking at a capacity building project in that category, where we could actually supply funds to help you get through the permitting process. So we can help pay some of those permitting fees or consultant fees associated with that. But we're still not responsible for obtaining the permits. We can just help
Okay,
with the
thank you.
costs.
Yep,
Yes.
that helps. Thank you.
Any other questions? Don't see anything in the chat. If you don't know how to raise your hand, then please feel free to unmute and ask your question.
There is a new question in the chat. I'll go ahead and read it out loud. The Green Infrastructure Guidance references the VCAP manual. Does that mean that the same VCAP technical requirements apply to this program? I'm mostly curious about the eligibility restrictions for living shorelines. VCAP can't provide assistance for shorelines with a fetch distance greater than 1.5 miles. Is that true for this program as well?
So that is not true for this program, technically speaking. However, $10,000 probably is not going to pay for a living shoreline with a fetch greater than 1.5 miles either. So if there are other partners or other funding sources that are involved in that, we would need to have an individual discussion to see how qualified that project might be. But as far as the Green Infrastructure Guidance part of that question, we did reference the VCAP manual because we didn't want to put out like a whole separate set of definitions and confuse people. But we're not necessarily following the VCAP manual in terms of their technical specs. As far as what they can fund for a proper project, yes, those ultimately refer back to the BMP clearinghouse that the state of Virginia has. And those are the technically correct specifications for the different types of projects. Did you want to add something, Mary Carson?
Nope. And I think that answered her. Yep, she said thanks. Okay, great.
Great.
All right, Mary Manty.
Hi, everyone. I just had a question about actual the grant process and who's going to be administering the funds. So if we were to apply for it and we need to sort of report back and all the things that the grant requires, is that going to go through VOF or is it going to go through you guys, Wetlands Watch?
I can answer that. Wetlands Watch you'll be sending all of those materials to Wetlands Watch, and then we'll review your report and any reporting after there.
Okay. And we do have several shorelines that are in permitting, and due to another grant that's closing in September, if permits do not, reach that timeline, is it possible to use your funding for something like that? the grant process for like a living shoreline that is just in the process of getting approved by the board, or Army Corps of Engineers kind of has a backlog. So just wondering if something that was approved in July or something like that, we wouldn't be able to use funding if we didn't get it done in time.
Let's have a conversation privately about that to discuss the specifics. But in general, the reason that we want these projects to be permitted at the time of application is it really reduces the chances of them being completed within the grant period if these preliminary steps haven't been achieved. Essentially,
I understand. I was just wondering. Thanks.
In some cases, you may have some communication from those regulatory agencies that indicate you are going to be approved, and it's just a matter of some technical holdup or something like that we could discuss. But we really prefer to have those applications, the permits in place.
Okay, Judy Fraser says, apologies if you address this, but what is the follow-up on grant projects? A final report out. So Stacy, I don't know if you want to take this, just about what the reporting process is like.
We will be providing a template for that final report. So it will be very clear what the expectations are, but essentially it will just be, a description of how you've met the project goals that were included in your application to begin with, photos of the completed project. It'll kind of be the backside of the application. So these are all the things you said you were going to do. How successful were you in implementing them? The only other reporting that we would be asking for through the course of the grant is if you have major changes to your budget, we would like an update on that as we go. If you need to allocate more than 10% and change direction with the project. Some of the feedback that we got during the research phase of development was that people did encounter some problems with other programs when they needed to kind of come up with a plan B. Things just weren't working out when they started getting into the implementation part of their project. And we are open to having those discussions midstream and working out a way to move the project forward.
Any other questions? Easy crowd today.
All right, well, I will go ahead and answer a question that we received via email last week. And that has to do with the source of this money. So if you are in a program that requires you to designate where matching funds come from, this does count as state money. So if you're looking to stack or use this as a match and you have some parameters that you have to abide by, that is where this money falls. It is state.
Well, we certainly don't want to keep people in a Zoom meeting just for the sake of seeing your faces. So if there are no further questions, it's been a real pleasure to spend a few of your lunch minutes with us. We're really appreciative of your interest of this program, and we look forward to working with each of you, hopefully, on the application side of things. Wetlands Watch staff will stay after just as people linger and remove themselves from the Zoom. If anybody wants to ask a question during that time. And then, as Madison has said, feel free to email at grants grants@wetlandswatch.org.